Good morning. Good to be with you. Looks like it's been a little wet there this morning, but still a lovely Father's Day. We've been studying on the tongue the last couple Sundays, and uh, great song selection by Brother Ron there in Love One Another. And I like that last stanza, if you will. Just shows the order of magnitude, if you will, of what the tongue can do. It says, brightest links of life are broken by a single angry word. You ever notice how many words and how many deeds it takes to build a relationship, a meaningful relationship, but that relationship can be destroyed with what? One angry word. And that's why we want to study these scriptures. While we may destroy relationships here on earth with an angry word, worse even yet is destroying our relationship with our Father who's in heaven and his Son Jesus Christ because we were unable to bridle the tongue, unable to get it under control, and because we continually sin with our tongue. And that kind of leads me into this morning's lesson. I want to look at three harmful habits of the tongue. Now, the key word here should be habits. As we all know, when we form a habit is what? Hard to break, right? Hard to get rid of. Whether it be biting nails, whether it be rolling the eyes, or whatever that habit might be that you have, we do it over and we do it over and over. It becomes second nature. We do it without even thinking. And that's something that we need to realize of with the tongue. Sometimes our sins with the tongue are habitual. We don't even realize that we're doing them. And yet we are guilty of sins. And we're going to look at three of them. Our proof text is going to come from James chapter 3 and verse 2 this morning. It says, For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body. So I think the importance here in James chapter 2 is if anybody who does not stumble, in other words, a man who's able to overcome and conquer these things, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body. So that's the goal that we want to get over these habits. We don't want to commit these things. James warns us of the dangers of the tongue. Matter of fact, he says we should be slow to speak over in James chapter 1, verse 19. However, so many of us are quick to respond, right? We get angry and there it went. It slipped out. Unbridled tongues make religion vain. That warning's given in James 1:26. So we make our religion vain with actions of the tongue. Speaks as those who will be judged in James chapter 2, verse 12. And the power of the tongue is reason to be cautious about teaching. And we see that in James chapter 3, verse 1 through 12. Welfare of the church depends on the proper use of the tongue. That's the reality of the situation. Again, the welfare of the church often depends on the proper use of the tongue. Whether to be loved, to love one another, to treat one another in good practice, or to teach the truth. It's all exercised through the tongue. So I want to notice three critical harmful habits of the tongue found among Christians. And the first one is the habit of being non-critical. The habit of being non-critical. We have an example of this, do we not? If we stop and we think about it, the Christians were not too critical of sin over in Corinth. Now, I'm not going to read all all 13 verses there of 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1 through 3, but I'll just highlight parts of it, if you will. And I'll call you over here. In his first one, he says, it is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you. In other words, somebody was committing sin in amongst them through the acts of sexual immorality. And these acts actually were that a son, a father's offspring, was having relations with his wife. And they get, Paul says, why are you allowing this to happen? Even the Gentiles or even the heathens among you don't even accept this type of behavior, and yet you guys seem to be proud of it. Why is that? Because they were non-critical. They had become indifferent, if you will. There in verse 11 it says, but now I have written to you not to keep company with anyone he named a brother who is sexually immoral, or covetous, or an adulterer, or a rival, or a drunkard, or an exhorter, not even to eat with such a person. What's he saying? I'm telling you that if you have any brother that are openly practicing sin, don't associate with them. Why? Why would that be? Why should we not have an association with brethren who or certainly to have association with sinners, right? Christ ate with sinners. But was that to encourage them to sin more? No, that was to share the gospel with them so that they might stop sinning. But when you have a brother who is openly sinning and you fail to not be critical of that sin, you become what? You become an enabler or an endorser of that sin. And that's what he's telling them here. So we ought to be critical of sin, regardless of who it is. And again, always remember, whenever we point to somebody and say, now granted, we need to do it in a loving manner. This is a song. That was we sung, love one another. We use the tongue and we come, softly. Not like, who was it? Teddy Roosevelt says, carried a big stick, No, we don't want to do that. We don't want to go browbeating everybody, saying you sinned. I don't think that's going to win anybody to Christ, if you will. But we come with a soft heart, a kind heart, a loving heart that utters kind, loving words to say, brother, you're sinning. I'm concerned about you. I'm concerned that you're guilty of these things. And they're probably going to get offended. It's okay. Just about everybody that I have ever known, especially adults, even children for the most part, don't like to be told what they're doing wrong, do they? Everybody likes to hear how good they are, but nobody wants to hear how bad they are. So expect a negative response, but still love them. But least of all, don't become non-critical of it. Don't say, I don't want to lose that relationship there, so I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. He or she's not going to take it well. I'll lose a friend if I point this out to them. Wouldn't it be better to lose a friend for a day or two, or for a week, or for a month, than to lose them for a lifetime, for eternity? Wouldn't that be a better outcome? But so often we get consumed with the here and now that we become non-critical. And it's usually out of selfish motivations. We ought not to be like the Corinthians here and endorse sin because we're afraid to rebuke, again, softly, gently. The next one is that the companions of Paul were to we're not too critical as well. Over in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 16, it says, at my first defense, nobody stood with me. Nobody had the courage to stand with me, and they all forsook me. Why? Because they didn't want to get their hands dirty. They didn't want to stand on the gospel side. May it not be charged against them. Again, these people were being non-critical. Paul would stand in defense to the point of being almost stoned to death for the gospel. People would probably witness that and say, I'm not getting me any of that. Zip. I'm not going to speak out against those actions. Whatever they, again, it's the idea of being non-critical. And we see here what Paul says. For those that were non-critical, those companions of him that would not stand with him, he said, may it not be charged against them. Does that gives an indication of how God might feel about that? I would say so, because he says, may it not be a sin. Remember, James says to know to do good and fail to do it is a sin unto you. That's what happens when we become non-critical. The Lord's watchmen in Israel were non-critical. Look over at Isaiah chapter 56. Lord here says, his watchmen are blind. They are all ignorant. They are all dumb dogs. They cannot bark, sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber. Yes, they are greedy dogs which never have enough. They are all shepherds who cannot understand. They all look at their own way, everyone for his own gain, for his own territory. So, the last sentence there shows the motivation behind being non-critical. As they all look to their own way, what's best for me? It's best for me not to get involved. It's best for me to not speak out against this stuff. It's best for me to just remain quiet. Why? So I might have gain, my own gain, whether I gain a friend, whether I gain influence, whatever it might be. That's not the way the Lord would have us to be. We are to stand on the Lord's side. We are to stand on the side of right, not on the side of wrong. Silence often means what in most minds? Acceptance. Right? Well, you never told me I couldn't. Anybody ever raised any kids and they do something? Well, you never said I couldn't. That comes into adulthood too. I'd worked with hundreds, if not thousands of people, and as a supervisor, I'd often hear, well, you never said we couldn't. You didn't say don't. We got to be careful of being non-critical. Many positive thinkers in the church today are non-critical. Like proverbial monkeys, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. The evil being rebuking people for sin, that type of evil. We don't want to speak about adultery in this congregation because, well, there might be some that are offended by it. That type of thing. For no reason to reprove and rebuke. Well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, or let's shine on. Like I say, I've never known anybody that when you point out something that they done wrong, that they shake your hand or they hug you and say thank you. Like I say, normally at first they are offended. Over in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 through 4, Paul writes, I charge you therefore before God and Lord Jesus Christ, whoever will judge the living and the dead at his appearing in his kingdom. Preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, convince, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and teaching. What's that? Point out sin. Let people know what sin is. Convince, rebuke, exhort, but with all long suffering. Verse 3, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap upon themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to fables. That's where Paul warned about this back in the first century. Just think of how bad it is 2,000 years later. They find no reason to expose or reprove unfruitful works of darkness. Ephesians 5:11. And have no fellowship with the unfaithful works of darkness, but rather expose them. When was the last time you heard sin being exposed in the church or somebody being exposed of sin? Now, I'm not saying we should be running around, pointing at all the specks in people's eyes. That's not what we're advocating. But we are advocating not having an attitude of non-criticalness to where we say nothing. We turn a blind eye to it. We won't even preach about it for fear of offending somebody. Isn't it not better to be offended and receive a crown of life than to be not offended and lose one's salvation? And they find reason at all to tell another of his fault. In other words, they don't want to speak of it. That's what, we over Matthew chapter 18, we're given that pattern. If a brother sins against you, go and tell him. But that takes courage. Nobody wants to do that. And then if he doesn't hear you, then take 2 or 3 witnesses. And then if he still fails to hear you, take it to him. But what we talked last Sunday that instead we want to what? We want to gossip and murmur, right? So and so did this. Have you heard what? That instead that's how we want to handle it. Not a good way. We need to be critical of sin. And unfortunately, we're often only critical of the critical. In other words, we only speak out against those who are what? Letting us know that we're messing up. Oh, he found fault with me. I'm going to find fault with him. Who are you to point at me? Mr. Plank in your eye. Isn't that often how it goes? That's for those that are non-critical. This is the only time that they want to, become boisterous. The next one or the next two, if you will. The first one will be hypo. We're going to talk about hypo and hypercritical. Both words here refer to somebody who are overly critical of others and who have double standards. So both are bad, okay? It's just that hypo refers to somebody who says one thing but does another, whereas hyper is someone who is over critical of the smallest, usually the smallest details. Okay. So let's begin by we often be, the use of the tongue is to become hypocritical. Hypocritical. Those who are hypocritical. These individuals, like the Pharisees, talk a good game, but they don't practice what they preach, do they? They live by double standards, if you will. Matthew chapter 23, verses 2 through 3 saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seats. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. So this is the brother and sister that says we ought to do this, or it's whatever that case may be. I hate speaking generalities, but anyways, these type of people tell you don't do this, don't do that, and this is true. But then they go right out and do it themselves. They are double-tongued. 1 Timothy 3:8 says, likewise, deacons must be reserved, not double-tongued, not giving too much wine, not greedy. In other words, they say one thing and do another thing. That's the hypocritical. For instance, they speak out of both sides of their mouths. They speak of one thing to the face and then another thing to their back. Oh, hey, good to see. Oh, I hate when that guy comes. That type of thing. That's a hypocritical attitude. When you see your fellow brother in Christ in the assembly, you'll shake, you'll be cordial with them and all this and that, but then as soon as they're gone, you're rolling your eyes, you're being critical of what they've done or whatever it is. The idea of being two-faced. That is not the Christian way. Might be the way of the world, and that's what a lot of times that's where we develop these habits. Might be political expedient to the politician to be like this, but it's not for the Christian. It's not something that we should be replicating. They use words as tools to exploit people. I didn't put this verse in for some reason. Over in 2 Peter chapter 2. And verse 3, it says, by covetousness they will exploit you with the deceptive words. For a long time their judgments have not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber. And then down in 18 and verse 19, he says, for when they speak great swelling words of emptiness, in other words, they puff you up, they build you up, they allure through the lust of the flesh, through lewdness, the ones who have actually escaped from those who live in error. Verse 19, while they promise them liberty, they themselves are slaves to corruption. For by whom a person is overcome, by him also he brought into bondage. So in other words, these people like to sweet talk you. They promise you all kinds of things, but but that's in reality that's not what's coming. Sometimes to further ungodly desires. They'll talk a good game. They'll make it sound really good game, but the motives are ungodly desires. What is to bring forth sin. Sometimes to further selfish ambitions. I don't know about here at East Cambridge, but I've seen brethren work the room, if you will, work the congregation by going from one group to the next, trying to get them on board for whatever modus of operandi that they're trying to convince everybody to do. And again, usually that's out of what? Selfish ambitions, whether it be a false doctrine or whatever. In other words, they're trying to get their way. We've all heard, the illustration, churches splitting over what color carpet to get in the auditorium. Well, I really wanted that red. I really thought that it looked better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes to enlist personal whipping boys, if you will. And they often preachers are often become their whipping boy for those that are influential, that are hypocritical, that like to use these words as tools to exploit. Probably the big exploit of gospel out there is the prosperity gospel. They'll preach and teach anything that how to get rich, but in order to get rich, you got to send me $19.95, or you got to do this, and the more you give to the church, the more that you're going to receive back from God. Is that true? No. Nowhere in the Bible does it say. I heard an interesting fact. I assumed that it was fact. I didn't look it up. But the idea of tithing, this one guy on YouTube, he claimed that tithing, when you go back and you read church history or whatnot, you don't start really seeing tithing mentioned in sermons until about the 1800s. He said up until that point, even through the medieval point, it was never really preached or teach. But then you start getting into the age of mega churches, big movements, and they say, and what they was trying to point out was the birth of the nonprofit organization, with little regard over what's to regulate how they use their money, is when tithing became big in denominational churches. And so, a lot of these people, they'll sweet talk you and try to sell you these things in order to get something to what? Feed these selfish ambitions, whether it be riches or ungodly desires. Got to be careful the hypocritical. And we don't need to be hypocritical ourselves. Let our yes be yes and let our no be no. If it's the right thing to do, how much persuasion do we need to do? Christ even told his disciples, if they won't hear you, what? Shake the dust off the sandals of your feet and move on. The last one is the habit of being hypercritical. Again, hypercritical is someone who is overly critical of the smallest details in a situation usually. This is probably where we find a lot of people. Hypercritics are excessive fault finders. How dare you look at me? I put it in terms, I always think of, always like the opening sequence of Hogan Heroes, that searchlight, if you will, searching around, trying to find those guys that are escaping, doing what they're not supposed to do. And what happens when the spotlight gets on something? They're always like, over there, look over there. He's escaping over there. In other words, get the spotlight off of me. That's what the hypercritics do. Don't look over here. They're doing worse. They constantly look for ulterior motives in people. well, the reason why so and so picked that Bible study, it's not really for that reason. It's for this reason over here. They constantly suspect sin without evidence of sin. I remember, I think we was, I think, what was, I think we was eating lunch after services down in Georgia, and this couple talked about how one time there was this a widower and then a single guy. There was suspect that they were establishing a relationship, and so what do? They go over to the person's house and they see how late they're staying. Why? Well, they wanted to what? They wanted to find fault with them. Oh, brother so and so stayed at sister so and so's house too late. What's too late? What do you even? Why are we surmising what was going on? They constantly bark rather than the dumb dogs of Isaiah, if you will. They're crying wolf all the time. Issue after issue after issue do they bring. They're never happy unless there's what? An issue to be argued about. That's the hypercritical attitude. It tears churches apart is what it does. It's not good whatsoever. The hypercritics are often grossly inconsistent as well. Consider Matthew chapter 11, verses 16 through 19. But to what shall I liken this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to their companions. Say, we played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We mourned to you, and you did not lament. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a winebibber. See, no matter what they did, they found fault. A friend of a tax collector and sinners, but wisdom is justified by her children. The hypocritical are still with us yet today. Hypocritics are manifested in various ways by being busybodies. We talked about that extensively last week. By becoming nitpickers. Again, the little specks in your eye. Worried about the little specks. Majoring in minor problems. Or making major problems out of something that's completely minor. But yet they neglect the what? Weightier matters. Often the weightier matters of their own life. Matthew chapter 23, verses 23 to 25 says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites or hypocriticals. For you pay tithes of mint and anise and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law. Justice, mercy, and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you cleanse the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of exhortation and self-indulgence. Yes, for the hypocritical person, they look good on the outside. They talk a great game, but they're often corrupt on the inside. And they find fault with everything. And they do what? They often elevate personal scruples and make them church-wide issues. That's the pattern of hypercritical brethren. The hypercritics are a clear danger to themselves. Like I said, they're a clear danger to themselves and also to the church. They can rip a congregation apart if they're not kept in check. Sin against brethren by condemning the innocent, finding fault in the innocent, surmising fault, if you will. Just like going over and camping outside somebody's house and swearing up and down. All they're doing illicit acts behind there because we can't see what they're doing. How do you know they're not just watching TV? Why aren't you giving your brother the benefit of the doubt? They know what sin is. Why are you worrying about what they're doing? They disrupt the peace and they tear down rather than to edify. They tear down others and they what? They build themselves up. Romans chapter 14 and verse 19 says, therefore let us pursue the things which make peace and the things by which one may edify others. That's what we should be pursuing. Pursue those things that make peace. Don't become non-critical. That's not what we're advocating. But especially in matters of judgment. Head coverings, 1 cup versus 2 cups. I'm talking about issues that some churches have dealt with. There's no reason to red carpet versus blue carpet. There's no reason to pull apart the church and to run off and cause all kinds of problems, is there? But yet that's what some live for. They destroy friendships. They destroy their own closeness with brethren. I've seen it. I've been there. Brethren have to end up avoiding them in what? Self-defense. And then they wonder why brethren are avoiding them. That's where we need to be that's where we need to be critics, not non-critics, letting them know why. And then they feel they're the ones who are being persecuted, the hypercritical ones. They're the ones being persecuted. Oh, you're avoiding me because I pointed out the sin of all these other people. Just something we need to be aware of, because if we're not careful, we can what? We can fall into this trap. That's the point of the lesson. It's not to say that anybody's doing these things. It's just to be cognitively aware of that these types of things exist, whether it be being non-critical, hypocritical, or hypercritical. They exist, and they all what? Entail matters of the tongue. So as we wrap things up this morning, we considered 3 harmful habits to Christians today. Again, they were being those who are non-critical, those who fail to exercise their tongue to point out sin, those that are hypocritical, those who say don't sin, but then they sin themselves, or they say one thing and then they do another. And then those that are hypercritical, those that go around pointing out everything. They point out the flaws of everybody, but then they don't want to speak about their own character flaws. And the reality of it is, all these are bad. All these are bad. All these we do not want to become habits of our own. So let us watch our tongues for our good and the good of our brethren. If a brother comes up to you and says, brother, you have sinned, don't get mad at them. Thank them. Hug them. A, think of the courage that it took to bring that to you. And then two, are you actually doing that? And if so, be thankful. And let us find balance between non-criticism and hypercriticism. Opposite sides of the spectrum, both sides of the spectrum are bad. We want to be in the middle, is where we ultimately want to be. Got to be a happy balance. So now we want to extend the invitation. The invitation is your opportunity to make yourself right with God. Whether it be to call upon the prayers of the church or the congregation, or to come forward and make a public confession of something that you may have done. We're here to facilitate that, or perhaps you'd like to become a Christian for the first time. Whatever that case may be, if you're subject to the gospel call in any shape, form, or manner, let it be known as we stand and sing the Psalm of the Chosen.